Hi, Miss Vickie. Thanks so much for being here today. I'm so happy we get a chance to chat.
Yes, I'm very glad to actually see you not behind the lens. I could see you from a distance while we were doing the filming, but it's nice to meet you over Zoom, Dylan. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, my pleasure. So today I just really just want to chat with you because our general director and a few of our other staff thought, Dylan, you're a young composer, and Miss Vickie, a big part of her relationship with the medium is the fact that she had this relationship with Giancarlo Menotti personally, and so it
Yeah.
might be neat for us to chat about that. And so I would like to talk a little bit about your history with his opera, The Medium, specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to show you a picture, and I want you to
Uh-oh.
see if you recognize this woman.
Yeah, that's a 25-year-old Baba. And that's at Boston Conservatory. And that's the first time I learned and delved into the role. Of course, I had not met Menotti yet, but I was familiar with his music. The truth is, my Menotti stories go even farther back than that because when I went to Chapel Hill for my undergrad degree, and my goal I thought was to become a lawyer, I auditioned for the Carolina Choir, and they heard something in me that nobody had heard before. And the next thing I know, I'm singing The Sound of Music for the voice department, and they give me a vocal scholarship to be a voice performance major. And I call home and say, Daddy, I ain't going to be no lawyer. I'm going to be a singer. And the reason Menotti comes into play is the first voice lesson. The first aria that I was ever given as a freshman at Chapel Hill was the lullaby from the console by Menotti. So my very first aria that I came home to my parents' piano and played and sang and convinced them that this was what I was supposed to do with my life was the lullaby from the console. So I fell in love with Menotti. It was the first opera aria that I ever sang. So then I go to Boston Conservatory for my grad degree, my master's in opera, and my mentor was John Moriarty. And he decided to mount the medium as a vehicle to showcase, my talents. And another colleague, we were double cast, and my parents flew to Boston to see it. And it was just like I fell in love at first sound and first sight. I loved the character. I loved immediately the way Menotti's music combined storytelling with sort of half spoken, half sung. It was a style I had never delved into. And the more I worked with him, the more I learned about that style. I loved how it brought out my singer actor. I couldn't just sing that piece. I had to be an actor that sang rather than a singer that acts. So I learned that at 25 years of age. Then my history with the medium continued because my first gig on the road was Wolf Trap, and I was performing there, and a director there saw me and said, "Hey, we'd like to bring you to Miami to Florida Grand Opera." My first real professional gig out of Wolf Trap to take an educational tour on the road of the medium. And so from 1985 to 1986, I spent months in Miami, getting up very early in the morning and touring the medium in high schools. And I will never forget that experience. The kids and their reactions and their passion and their hating me when I would beat Toby, and all of this stuff. It was just so interactive and fabulous. So then it was some time between that and when I met Menotti, because that would have been 1986. And I first met him when I auditioned for Spoleto in Charleston. And so I first went to Charleston and didn't work with him directly. He was just sort of the power that be. And so I met him at parties, and then we got to know each other, and he said, "Hey, how about coming to Spoleto, Italy, and doing the console? And we're going to do a recording for Chandos, and I want you to be the secretary. Not the granny, not the grandma, not yet, but I want you to be the secretary." And so my first big experience with, we call him GC. He got to be like a grandfather to all of us. We got so close, So I always called him GC. And he first hired me for the secretary, and then it was 2 or 3 summers after that that he said, I want you to come and do the medium in the small theater at the Cayo Meliso on the piazza right under where he lived. And he said, you're going to do 16 days in a row. And I said, what? He said, it's a small space and a small theater and you can do it. And it was like Broadway, really. That's what he wanted it to be, very intimate and everything. So my medium experience has been a full circle from the beginning of my first days in Chapel Hill through New Orleans this past month. And for it to be the first thing that I came out of the pandemic to do, I just felt so full circle about the whole experience.
That's beautiful.
And what I bring to the role now compared to a 25-year-old is my life experience, not that I've ever really been to a seance and not that I've ever really told anyone's fortune, but life experience and what you learn through that experience, you bring to the role in a different way every time you perform it again.
I'd love to expand on that, actually. What are some of the ways that it's different from, being young Miss Vickie at 25 in Boston to, now doing it years later, in New Orleans for film with New Orleans Opera?
Yeah, well, I guess it's almost hard to remember back that long ago. It was so long ago, but I think if I were to say the biggest thing is back then, I probably couldn't tap on real experiences for her pain and her character's trajectory. Like I knew that I was supposed to start out one way and end another way, but I don't think I had the pain and the tortured soul aspect of it that life gives you while you're on the road for 35 years doing this business. And I feel like now I'm not pretending to be her so much, but I can almost just go there instantly and become Baba. And I think in college, I had to work that out in a process. I had to go, okay, here I'm pretending to be drunk, and here I'm pretending to be angry, and here I'm pretending to be, a charlatan. And I had to play act, if you will. And now I noticed when I got to New Orleans that it was like, put on her shoes and you're her. It was all encompassing. And I hope that on film, I haven't seen one frame, but I'm hoping that on film that comes across, that I'm fully inhabiting her now from start to finish. There's never a moment when I want to be Vickie the singer.
Yeah. Wow. Do you, I'm just curious because I got to watch some of the recordings, some of the filming itself. And
Yeah.
the rehearsals. Would you consider yourself a method performer? Because sometimes, like after the end of the opera, I would watch you still inhabiting this, Madame Flora space for a while, and you kind
You're
of had to
right.
come back into Miss Vickie. Can you talk
That's
about that?
amazing you saw that and actually felt that, because, yeah, it's like when the last beat cleared and the sound cleared, I didn't become Vickie immediately. I felt an exhaustion in a way. I remember I would always sit down on that platform and kind of go into my own space, and I honestly cried several times after we ran it. And nobody came near me, you noticed, and I didn't ask them to stay away. They just knew that I was having that aftermath, if you will, of allowing a character to inhabit you like that. And by working with Giancarlo, I learned that was his goal with his operas. He really did want actors that could sing. So when he found a performer that he thought was equally strong as a singer and an actor, those were the people that he grabbed onto and was loyal to. And he gave me so many opportunities. Also with the Consul, where he took me to Buenos Aires for my debut in Buenos Aires in the Consul with him directing. So that was being on the road with Giancarlo Menotti, which was a completely more fun experience than being in Spoleto where he was running the whole festival. This was him going, where do you want to go for dinner? And we would walk into a restaurant in Argentina and the people would recognize him and stand up and start cheering. It was just wild. So, anyway, I digress, but my point was that he taught me to go there and to sacrifice maybe something perfect vocally to give people chill bumps. And so I trusted him and I learned through the music and the work with him how to do that. And I wish I had known that when I was starting out with things like Carmen, even, which I sang her 250 times. So, of course, she fully inhabited me. Eventually, she fully inhabited me. We call our car Carmen. I mean,
Yeah.
But that is what I learned with Menotti. And you're right. At the end of the run-throughs, I was depleted in a way, like exhausted because I had given all that I had. And I remember saying to Claire that if we have to do this a second time today, I'll give you whatever I have left in my tank, but most likely my tank will be empty. Because I pace the role in a way that I start with a full tank and I end with an empty tank. So on that filming day, I wanted to get one solid front to back in the can, as we say, in case I had nothing left. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And we ended up filming the ending a second time. Is that correct?
Yes, we did the ending and another place in the seance. And what was tricky about that is I had already gone disheveled and, smeared makeup and taken my wig off and all this stuff. And I'm like, how do we go back to being, glam in some way? How do I get the hair and makeup back? So they gave me like a half hour to go regroup and kind of back up and take a couple of more. We only did a couple of takes. We finished hours ahead of schedule, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
They liked what we did so well that they just tweaked a couple of spots and said, you guys are good. Let's toast each other and head home. So it was just an all-encompassing experience that I think maybe was enhanced by the pandemic and the fact that that was my first time letting all of that out of my soul, my first time in almost 13 months. When my life for the past 35 years has been on the road 9-10 months a year. So my home life in the past has only been a couple of months a year. For the past year, I've been home for a year, and that was my first time out, opening myself up as a performer and singing and inhabiting a character. That may have had to do with the magnitude of what I was experiencing. I'm sure.
Amazing. I think it all comes across. I got to see a few samples of the film,
Okay.
and it looks fantastic. Sounds
Does
great.
it?
Yeah.
I'm like, I have nervous anticipation, and I think what that is like I'm a Leo and born in August and I'm a control freak and I did my job and then I had to turn over control. And so I don't know what it's going to look like, sound like, anything, but I knew by the people I met and how professional everybody was, I knew that I was in really good, safe hands. So I'm just so excited to see it.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm excited for everybody to see it.
Yes.
I want to backtrack a little bit, and you mentioned something I thought was so interesting, talking about inhabiting a character sometimes at the expense of things vocally, and how GC kind of wanted it that way. And
Yeah.
I ask you this because I know you've sung tons of Verismo stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, even though Menotti considered himself an American composer for most of his life, he kind of realized at the end, oh, it turns out I was an Italian Verismo composer, and a lot of people put him in that same school.
Agree.
So would you maybe want to talk a little bit about the aspects of Verismo that you see, in your, let's say, more traditional repertoire, and how you also see aspects of Verismo in Menotti's work?
Well, there's no doubt that he was an Italian composer by the way that he understood and wrote the vocal lines. By the way, also, I might add, he set text for me. In other words, yes, it's in English, and it is much harder to sing passionate music in English. That's much harder than in Italian. So let's compare to Trovatore, Verdi, and Azucena. Now, as Azucena, that is one of my favorite characters and one of my favorite roles for sure. But for her, if I came at her from the acting first and not the vocalism, it would not work. You cannot. Because that, talk about a beast of a role, and in the second act where you sing two huge Shainas, you're on stage 45 minutes. The orchestra is so different. All of those aspects coming into it, you must set yourself up as a singer and then find ways to bring the acting into it that don't take away from that. And that's also what your listener expects. That's what your audience and your fans expect. They expect Verdi. They expect a certain amount of head and chest voice and all this different stuff that they've listened to recordings of for, they're expecting Fiorenzo Cosotto or Dolores Ajic. And so you've got to emulate something that is similar to that style. But with Menotti, I find that even though it is Verismo in its writing and in its sweep, there are these huge, sweeping, grandiose phrases, But in the medium, there are actually, I would say, less than I feel when I do the consul and do the grandmother, not the secretary. Right. The secretary was acting because we spent a week figuring out how he wanted me to pitch and say the word next with my stamp on the desk. What pitch, what pocket in my nasality, how he wanted that word said 100 times as the secretary. Impassionate. With the medium, I find she's sort of a mix of those because you've got that Sprechstimme and you've got that spoken, half sung, half speech thing, but then you've also got places in the aria and in Black Swan where you really get to do a legato sweeping phrase. So it kind of is everything into one. Now, I've also done Vanessa, where he wrote the libretto for Barber's Vanessa. And see, I've always been married to his ability to text paint. His libretto in Vanessa is just unparalleled. It's just the most beautiful words. And the same thing in the console. Same thing when I'm working with my sopranos in the studio on Steal Me Sweet Thief from Old Maiden the Thief. When I'm working on them all in the Night Visitors. I always find myself drawn to how the words are painted musically. I just think he was a master of that. So, obviously you can tell I'm a huge fan and ambassador of Menotti. He always felt, believe it or not, somewhat unappreciated, if you will, by reviews that would say things like, he's the poor man's Puccini. That was his least favorite review he ever read. He was angered and hurt by that, and I don't blame him. And I do think that also even though he was Broadway and Pulitzer and all this stuff, and Hollywood, my gosh, his Hollywood stories are amazing. He always wanted to be also, a big Metropolitan Opera composer. Commissioned, these kind of things. Europe seemed to appreciate it in one way more than America, but then some of his operas took off here, like Consul in the Medium, and Amal certainly is one of the most performed operas ever at Christmas time.
Yeah.
And, there's a film and all that. That made him very happy.
That's so funny that you mentioned he felt underappreciated because he's arguably one of the most famous composer,
prolific,
at the time of his life.
Absolutely.
A lot of people say that's due to the convergence of the popularity in like radio and TV.
Yes,
he was the first composer to be commissioned to write a radio opera, The Old Maid and the Thief, in 1939. And then the
fabulous
composer to be commissioned for a film opera, Amal and the Night Visitors.
Yeah, with Stratus. That is such a beautiful film too, and he did love the notoriety. And I think that, we probably all feel underappreciated. We all think that we should have had something we didn't have, or the grass is greener. But I remember how he felt like when we did the recording of the console, how proud he was to put his stamp on his version of how he wanted his own opera done, and to know he was leaving that behind. And the way that he invested in us recording the console for Chandos and every detail and the DVD, that is a work that we all knew we would be proud of for the rest of our lives. And his thirst for applause and for notoriety was as big as any diva I ever saw. And so some people say, you know, why in the world did Giancarlo Menotti, why was his funeral in Monte Carlo? And I don't know if you know this, but I was in Monte Carlo for my debut in Monte Carlo, also was Baba in the Medium. Menotti's son, Francis Menotti, was directing it. So Giancarlo came from Italy to Monte Carlo for the opening night to take his bow with me, come out there, and he would be in the wings with his cane like an old man. And the minute the applause started, the cane went away and he would come out and almost dance. I never saw anybody love it more, and it was just so heartwarming to see. He was to bow with me on opening night in Monte Carlo, and he got sick after he got there, ended up in the hospital, passed away the day or two before we opened. So I ended up singing at the memorial service because I was there in Monte Carlo. It was just a surreal situation. And the last things that he said to me about Baba and about the Medium, I included in my thought process for opening night. And it was the most magical, one of the most magical experiences performing that I remember in my entire career. Just, I was doing it for him, you know?
Yeah.
It was amazing.
I read something you wrote about him. I can't remember what it was, but you mentioned this anecdote, and you said something about learning to trust the silences in between notes he wrote. Can you tell me what that means?
That's a huge thing. You know how every composer writes fermatas, obviously, but for him, if he wrote one, you might as well consider that double or triple what any other composer thought that would be. He thought that there was so much drama in silence. He liked to unnerve the audience. He wanted them to be uncomfortable. So that's a perfect question you asked, tying in with Monte Carlo. And I told New Orleans this too when we got there, and we did it on the film to a certain extent because I told them this story. He told me in Monte Carlo for opening night that he wanted me in the seance, after the seance is over and everything is cleared and there's silence, before the big scream when I feel someone touch my throat. He told me to count, now get this, to 30 before I scream. Now, I could only convince Robert Lyle in New Orleans to count to 10 because that was a long time to leave that orchestra sitting there waiting. But we did leave a huge grand pause there. Then we realized after we recorded it how hard it was going to be to get that together on the filming. But in Monte Carlo, I didn't tell anyone, and we've got our hands touching, and my head is down, and I counted to 30. You could have heard a pin drop in the entire opera house. And when I let out the scream, it was one of the most ridiculous, unhealthy, just heartbreaking screams. Mrs. Nolan in the seance fell back in her chair and hit the floor. My colleagues didn't know. Half the audience in Monte Carlo screamed out in response. People, then they started to almost laugh because they got so nervous. And I swear to you, and I'm not this kind of person, I'm really not, but I swear to you, I had a visual of him in the balcony with his cane up in the air cheering. Because he loved that intensity and that silence and that awkwardness and that uncomfortable feeling between performer and audience. He wanted it to be interactive. He wanted the audience to feel what you feel. And that's what I love about performing his music the most. I feel them in my hand, you know. Now filming was different, and I missed that. But I got it from the 10 people in the room. You included. I mean, I felt an energy from the people behind the camera and the people behind the desk and the people behind the lighting. that they were in it with us. I could feel that. But it wasn't a house filled with thousands, you know.
Wow. That's amazing.
It's cool. It's really cool.
I feel like I need a second after that. Anyway.
Well, as a composer, you know, that's so powerful.
Oh yeah. I mean,
You know, that's why you compose.
yeah, exactly.
And to be honest, that's why I think that I give up home and family and travel and do what I do. A big part of it is touching people, interacting with people, sharing with people. And the notes that you get along the way where they say, you didn't know this, but I had just lost my mother, or you didn't know this, but I had just gone through an illness and your music uplifted me. That's why we do what we do as artists, I think. It should be. And so I think during the pandemic, we've all just been looking for a way to share our voice and to help with our voices and with music. We know how powerful it is. So I hope this film is going to do that.
Oh, it will.
I hope so. I'm sure it will.
Well, with our last couple minutes, I want to talk briefly about the composer-performer relationship in general. And, you know, I mean, what was it like knowing that, you know, you're performing this role that you've spent many, many years on, and the guy who wrote the words and the music, and in many cases directed all your movements, is right there watching?
More intimidating than if you're singing Bizet or Puccini.
Yeah.
Much more intimidating, because I think we all want to please, and for the composer to be sitting there, you want to do justice and you want to give him what he wants, but you don't yet know what that is. So what I learned with GC is that you could change his mind, which is rare. Not only rare with a composer performer, but rare with an older man. Like, I mean, he was already ancient when I met him. And the secretary and the consul was a perfect way. One time, and it was not my fault, it was Susan Bullock doing Magda Sorel. And I was in profile at the secretary desk, and Susan was doing, you know, the huge To This We Come papers scene. And the way she did it and the way I felt with her, and we were good friends while we did it, I was in profile, but she got to me and a huge crocodile tear dropped down my face. And we were in rehearsal. And Menotti got on the God mic, and you could hear the emotion in his voice. And he said, "You cannot cry. You're ruining my opera." And before opening night, he came up and he had thought about it. And he said, "You know what? If you can shed a tear tonight, shed a tear." And he took the secretary from being as hardcore as he thought he wanted her to having vulnerability, which changed the entire way I paced that role that night. So by the time we filmed that and recorded it, he changed his mind about the arc of that character. So things like that ability to ask a composer, why did you do this right here? Why did you mark that like that? What did you want right here? How many times should I do this Ave Maria? So things like that. How would I know that he wanted the Ave Maria? The more I did it, the more he would say lower, 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 lower. And he wanted it fast and he wanted it low, but that's not in the score.
Right, yeah.
So you better believe anything he said to me ever, and we didn't have smartphones then to record all that, I was writing it in that score. I wrote down everything I could ever remember that he said about any of the roles I did and now I'm sharing those with my students.
Yeah.
You know, it's so cool to pay it forward and to pass it on. I want them to, I've got every soprano I can find singing Steal Me, Sweet Thief, because I love it, first of all. But, you know, I've had an unusual amount of experience with living composers. I mean, the Grammy Award is from working on Ghost of Versailles with LA Opera with John Corigliano. So I didn't get my Grammy till I was in my late 50s, and that came from doing the modern piece with Ghost of Versailles. And then Mark Adamo, I also did the world premiere of Lysistrata with Houston, and then that was my New York City Opera debut.
Oh, wow.
Late in life, I skipped city opera. And so all of these things, most of the biggest breaks I'd say I've had in my career were from working with living composers. Another Grammy nomination, a piece called Desire Under the Elms by Edward Thomas, that has never even been fully produced as an opera. And we were Grammy nominated. And that was with Jerry Hadley and James Morris in the cast. So that recording is unknown to a lot of people, and it's a gem. So I've had a ton of amazing experiences. Tom Pasatieri, Philip Glass, my Carnegie Hall debut was Philip Glass' Child Alice. So if you look at my bio, there's a ton of modern music in it, and most people are like, with that accent that she's got from the South, how is she known for doing American opera? Well, just like Gomer Pyle, I lose the accent when I sing. So it's been a great part of my career, and I'm very, very, very proud to say that I'm an ambassador for American opera and for opera in English in my native language, but also an ambassador for the music of Giancarlo Menotti. I could not be more proud.
I love that. James Marvel, the director of this production, said that he said, "Oh, Vickie Livengood, she's the gold standard on these kind of things."
Oh, how sweet.
Now I understand a little more why that's.
I had a blast working with James, and he was so incredible in that whatever he had in his mind, he also said, "Tell me what you're thinking here. What do you want to do? Let's find a way to work this out together." It was such a collaboration, and I enjoyed it immensely. I think that's how we got the project done so efficiently. Is James was prepared, but he was also ready to let you bring what you bring to the table.
I love that. I would love to close out with any advice you have on composer performance or composer performer collaborations and relationships, not only for the performer, but if you have any advice for the composer, I'd love to hear that too.
Well, I guess selfishly, the main thing I would say is if you have the opportunity to write for a specific artist and collaborate with that artist, and what I think composers can learn from singers about things like tessitura, things like what shelves you want to put a mezzo on and what shelves you want to put a soprano on or a tenor on, how a tenor likes to approach their high notes, how low are they comfortable, what's our favorite key signatures. I was in with a fabulous baritone lesson this morning, and he said, my favorite key is D flat major. And I'm like, really? And so some of my singers prefer flat keys to sharp keys. There's all this crazy stuff. How to set text for a singer, what kind of vowels singers really do need and prefer on high notes. And certain composers are, we call them singers composers. And there are others where we are challenged in an uncomfortable way. I did do a world premiere in Madrid in Spanish of a piece that changed meter every bar, basically, and was all over the map with intervals, almost no melody. And that was probably, and I'm sure will be, the hardest challenge I ever had in my whole career. I didn't get a big chance to talk to that composer and say, couldn't you have maybe done this instead? So I think the more composers understand singers and the technique of singing, the better they will be able to produce that marriage of voice and melody and rhythm together in a way they want it to come forth, understanding that. Because we're expected to understand how you're writing. We're expected to understand all that meter changing and all the, different, we're supposed to sing in 8 languages, blah, blah, blah. I just think that some composers don't think about how that's going to fit the singer. When they write it, they hear it in their head, but they're not thinking about the vocalist. But I haven't had that experience very often myself, I'll be honest. I've been really super blessed to work with composers that write brilliantly for the voice. It's just, that's why I've loved it all these years. That's why I've enjoyed singing in my own language. Most people think English is the worst language to sing in. I love it because people aren't thumbing through a libretto or looking up at a surtitle. They're listening to me tell them a story. What could be cooler than that?
That's the thing. I mean, that's really the
That's the
thing.
thing.
What about for singers or for performers? Any advice on that end?
In what way?
Composer performer relationships.
Composer performer. Well, I would say always try it before you ask for an adjustment. I learned that also early on. Don't go in with your own thoughts, but immediately go in and overly prepared. Know your stuff. I mean, seriously, I'm not going to insult a living composer or a dead one for that matter by not going in 100% prepared. That's the key to everything. Don't show up at a first rehearsal and be doing wrong intervals and wrong rhythms and wrong text painting when the guy is sitting there. It's embarrassing. So for me, preparation is key. But then in that initial meeting, when you're saying, tell me what you wanted here, what were you looking for? Why is this soft? Why is this loud? What is this crescendo about? Have that conversation and be open to listen to what their thoughts and their inspirations were. I want to know what the composer was inspired by. Why did he write this? What can I do to bring that to life for you? Be open and willing to ask those questions.
Yeah, open and willing.
Yeah, open and willing.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Miss Vickie, for taking the time to chat with me in the middle of
Well, I
your.
have to ask you if you sing at all because I'll tell you this, you've got a very nice resonant speaking voice.
Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez.
I,
Yeah.
I really usually know if a singer's going to be good by how they talk. And I'll be honest, you've got like you could be on the radio.
Oh, that's so nice. Thanks. I have I triple majored in school, and vocal performance
See?
was
See?
one of my things. And so I
It's
still,
a nice speaking voice.
yeah, I sing with the opera,
Oh,
some
great.
chorus stuff, and I do
Great.
solo and choral stuff around the state.
Interesting. Well, you could also do a DJ business. You could also get on the radio with that. Take that show on the road.
I love that. I love that.
It's been a real pleasure. Your questions were so well thought out and insightful and made me think in a new way. So I really enjoyed talking with you.
I appreciate that so much. Okay, well, thanks again. Have a great evening, and I'll see you
Thank
Friday.
you. Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Dylan. Bye bye.